October 8, 1945, Amarillo, Texas. Special Agent Thomas Crawford stepped off the train carrying a briefcase and orders from Washington that made his stomach tighten. 3 German women prisoners were pregnant. Their fathers were American civilians. Cowboys, ranch hands. Men who'd been tasked with guarding enemies of the state. Somewhere between barbed wire and wide horizons, fraternization had crossed into something the government couldn't ignore. Before we continue, if you're enjoying these untold stories from history, hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of history enthusiasts. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, whether you're in Texas, Berlin, or anywhere between. Your support helps us keep bringing these forgotten chapters to life. Now, let's get back to the story. Crawford adjusted his hat against the panhandle wind and studied the endless flatness stretching before him. He'd investigated sabotage rings in Houston, tracked enemy agents in New Orleans, hunted black market profiteers along the Gulf Coast. This assignment was different. No one was accusing these women of spying. No one suggested the Cowboys were enemy collaborators. But somewhere in this dust-blown corner of Texas, the neat categories of war had dissolved into something messier, something human. And in that moment, staring at the horizon where Earth met sky without interruption, Crawford realized he wasn't investigating a crime. He was investigating what happens when the rules of war collide with the chaos of the heart. The pregnancy of Elise Hartman was discovered during a routine medical inspection at the Hereford Processing Center on September 18, 1945. She was 23 years old, a former telephone operator from Stuttgart, 4 months along. The camp physician, Dr. Margaret Walsh, noted it in her records with clinical precision. Patient presents at approximately 16 weeks gestation. Patient is unmarried German national classified as auxiliary personnel. Captured April 1945. Dr. Walsh was 47, experienced enough to recognize when someone was hiding something, wise enough to know when to ask questions carefully. She examined Elise in the small infirmary room, September heat pressing against the windows despite the approaching autumn. The young woman stared at the ceiling while Dr. Walsh worked, her hands folded protectively over the slight swell of her stomach. "How long have you known?" Aticho, Walsh asked. Elise's silence stretched like the Texas plains outside. "Finally, 2 months. Maybe longer." The father, Dr. Walsh, didn't need to finish the question. Elise's expression was answer enough. Protocol was protocol. Prisoner fraternization with civilians violated federal regulations established when the POW program began in 1942. By 1945, America held approximately 375,000 German prisoners across the country. Most were military personnel, but roughly 10,000 were women auxiliary personnel like Elise, clerks, telephone operators, nurses. The War Department had created work programs to put them to use, particularly in the labor-starved Southwest. Ranch families could request German workers to help with domestic labor and agricultural work. The rules were clear. Maintain distance, treat them as prisoners, prevent fraternization. Dr. Walsh filed her report that afternoon. Within a week, 2 more cases surfaced. Hannah Becker, 26, formerly a clerk in a Bremen shipping office, 3 months pregnant. Katharina Vogel, 21, who'd worked in a military hospital in Berlin, 2 months along. All 3 had been assigned to work programs on ranches surrounding Hereford. All 3 had developed relationships with American men in positions of authority or proximity. The War Department received Dr. Walsh's consolidated report on October 2nd. By October 5th, Special Agent Thomas Crawford was en route from the FBI field office in Dallas. Crawford arrived in Amarillo on the 8th, checked into a modest hotel near the rail yard, and spent his first evening reviewing the case files. 3 women, 3 separate ranch assignments. 3 American men who would need to be identified and questioned. The landscape outside his window was alien to a man raised in Philadelphia. Here, emptiness pressed down with physical weight. The sky didn't end, just kept going until your eyes gave up trying to find where it met the earth. He'd grown up where buildings created horizons, where the world had boundaries you could see and touch. This place felt like falling. The next morning, Crawford drove to Hereford in a government sedan. The panhandle unfolded around him-flat grassland, interrupted by windmills and distant cattle. Barbed wire fences running parallel to the road for miles without deviation. Dr. Walsh met him at the processing center. It's a collection of temporary structures that had housed German prisoners since the previous spring. Most had been repatriated by now. But several dozen remained, mostly women, waiting for paperwork, for decisions about their futures, for answers about families back in Germany. 3 women, Crawford said, spreading photographs across Dr. Walsh's desk. I need to interview them separately, and I'll need the names of the men responsible. Dr. Walsh leaned back in her chair. Her expression was carefully neutral. Agent Crawford, these women have been through considerable trauma. The regime's collapse, capture, transportation across an ocean. Months of uncertainty about their futures. Whatever happened here, I don't believe coercion was involved. That's what I'm here to determine, Crawford said. The law is clear about fraternization between prisoners and civilians. Crimes were committed. These women weren't prisoners of war in the traditional sense, Dr. Walsh interrupted. They were auxiliary personnel, clerks and telephone operators and nurses. They didn't fight. Most surrendered willingly when given the opportunity. Crawford opened his briefcase. Nevertheless, they were enemy nationals under federal custody. The men who fathered these children violated regulations. I need names. Dr. Walsh was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled out a different file, one she'd prepared knowing this conversation would come. 3 ranch assignments. The Mackenzie Ranch, the Harrison Spread, the Callahan property. She slid the file across the desk. You'll find your answers there. Whether you'll find crimes is another matter. The Mackenzie Ranch sat 12 miles southwest of Hereford, a modest operation focused on cattle and horses. Crawford drove out that afternoon, the sedan kicking up dust along the unpaved county road. He found Sam Mackenzie repairing a fence near the main house, replacing a rotted post with fresh cedar. Mackenzie was 34, too essential to ranch operations to have been drafted. He'd grown up on this land. Grown up on his father died in 1940. Ran it with the help of 2 hired men and, until recently, a German woman assigned through the labor program. Crawford introduced himself, showing his credentials. Mackenzie set down his post-hole digger and wiped his hands on his jeans. His expression didn't change. Not surprise, not fear, just a kind of resigned acceptance. I figured someone would come eventually, Mackenzie said. He gestured toward the house. We can talk inside. My wife should hear this too. Martha Mackenzie was 31, a schoolteacher who'd given up her position when they married. She poured coffee without being asked, her movements precise and controlled. She knew why Crawford was here. They sat at a wooden table scarred from decades of use. Crawford pulled out his notebook. I'm investigating the pregnancy of Elise Hartman, formerly assigned to this property. I need to understand the circumstances. Sam and Martha exchanged a look before Sam spoke. Elise came in April to help with cooking, cleaning, some garden work. The program told us to treat enemy labor as prisoners, keep our distance. He shrugged. That lasted a week. She wasn't an enemy, just a frightened young woman who'd lost her family in the bombing of Stuttgart. She had no home to return to, no one waiting in Germany. So we treated her like a person. Martha leaned in. Agent Crawford Elise ate at our table and slept in our guest room. She worked hard, and we paid her what we could so she could buy things in town. She became our friend. Crawford shifted his attention to Martha. When did the relationship with your husband begin? Martha didn't hesitate. Sam and I have been married 11 years. We can't have children. Elise knew. She was lonely. We all were. What happened wasn't planned. Are you saying this was a consensual arrangement involving all 3 parties? Sam met his gaze directly. I'm saying Elise and I developed feelings for each other with Martha's knowledge and eventually her blessing. Martha and I love each other. But we also came to care for Elise. What happened between us wasn't about war or prisoners or breaking rules. It was about three people finding something they needed. The silence stretched. Crawford had investigated dozens of cases, interviewed hundreds of witnesses, developed an instinct for lies and half-truths. These people weren't lying. They weren't hiding anything beyond what they'd already revealed. The notebook in his hands suddenly felt heavier than it should. "Where is Miss Hartman now?" Crawford asked. "At the processing center," Martha said. "But she'll be back. We've applied for sponsorship to keep her in the country. Once the baby is born, we plan to raise the child together. All three of us." Crawford closed his notebook. "You understand this violates federal regulations, Mr. Mackenzie? You could face criminal charges." Sam nodded. "I understand, but I don't regret it. Neither does Martha. Neither does Elise." The Harrison spread was larger. Nearly 3,000 acres running cattle and growing winter wheat. Crawford found Robert Harrison in the equipment barn working on a tractor that had thrown a belt. Harrison was 41, a widower whose wife had died from pneumonia 3 years earlier. His son was serving with the Marine Corps somewhere in the Pacific. Harrison saw Crawford approaching and straightened, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He'd been expecting this visit. The town was small enough that news traveled faster than government sedans. They walked to the house together, neither speaking. Inside, Harrison poured whiskey into 2 glasses without asking if Crawford wanted any. They sat in a living room that still held evidence of a woman's touch curtains, photographs, a quilt draped across the sofa. The house felt like a museum of a life that had stopped 3 years ago. "Anna Becker," Crawford began. Harrison drank deeply. "She came in May to cook, since I can't boil water. Quiet woman wouldn't meet my eyes, moved like she expected a blow. Her husband died in the final weeks, maybe friendly fire. 26, widowed, no family." He stared into his glass. "My wife Catherine was everything. After she died, I felt nothing." Then Anna arrived, and the house stopped feeling empty. "When did it become intimate?" Crawford asked. "July," Harrison said. "Heat wave, hard to sleep. She had a nightmare, woke screaming. I heard her, went to her room. She was crying, apologizing in broken English, seeing her husband's face. I held her until she stopped shaking. After that, things changed." Crawford took notes. "Did you know it was illegal?" Harrison let out a bitter laugh. "Agent, I've followed rules all my life. Anna wasn't a prisoner. She'd lost everything, so had I. What we found was survival, not defiance. What are your intentions regarding Miss Becker and the child?" Harrison met Crawford's gaze. "I'm going to marry her if she'll have me. The baby will have my name. I don't care what Washington thinks about it." The Callahan Ranch was the smallest assignment. Brothers Daniel, 38, and Michael, 35, both 4F. One from a heart murmur, the other from partial deafness, met Crawford at the corral. "Katharina," Daniel said, "you're here about her. I need to know which of you is the father." Crawford replied. "We don't know," Michael said. "Could be either. It doesn't matter to us." Daniel explained that Katharina, a former nurse scarred by wartime horrors, had come in June. The brothers weren't married and shared everything on the ranch. She fit into their life without judgment. Michael added, "Families don't always look like what the government thinks." Crawford felt the investigation slipping from regulations into human complexity. Over the next 3 days, he interviewed the women. Elise, Hartman.com, and Soft-Spoken said Sam and Martha Mackenzie had treated her kindly from the start. Friendship grew into romance in June, with Martha acknowledging it without anger. "What did you feel?" "Confused," Elise admitted. In Germany, marriage was sacred, exclusive, but Martha explained that they couldn't have children, that their marriage was strong enough to include someone else. She said if Sam and I developed feelings, she wouldn't stand in the way. "Did you feel coerced?" Crawford asked directly. Elise met his eyes. Agent Crawford, I was a prisoner. Technically, Sam had power over me. But no, I wasn't coerced. I was given a choice. I could have said no. Could have requested transfer to another assignment. Instead, I chose to stay. I chose Sam. And I chose to accept Martha's extraordinary generosity. Anna Becker's interview followed a similar pattern. She was more guarded initially, her English less fluent, but her story was consistent with Harrison's account. She'd been broken by loss, had found unexpected comfort in a widower who understood grief, had chosen to build something new from the ruins of her old life. I know rules were broken, Anna said, through occasional pauses to find the right English words. But I don't regret it. Robert gave me a reason to imagine a future. Before him, I thought I would return to Germany and simply exist until I died. Now I'm carrying a child who will grow up in America, who will never know war the way we knew it. Katharina Vogel was the youngest of the three, and her interview was the most difficult. She'd seen things in the military hospital that had traumatized her. Wounded soldiers, civilians caught in crossfire. The consequences of a regime that had sent millions to their deaths. She spoke haltingly about the nightmares, about the guilt she carried for having been part of the system, even in a minor role. Daniel and Michael didn't judge me, she said. They didn't ask me to justify my past or explain myself. They just accepted that I was damaged and needed time to heal. Her hands trembled slightly. What developed between us happened slowly. It wasn't planned. It was three broken people finding a way to be less broken together. Do you know which of them is the father? Katharina shook her head. Does it matter? The child will have two fathers who want responsibility more than many children get in Hereford. Crawford spent evenings at the diner, listening as the town discussed the scandal openly. Some residents were outraged German, women were enemy prisoners, and the men who loved them had broken rules and loyalty. Others disagreed. They weren't soldiers, a farmer said. They were clerks and nurses. The men showed them kindness. Nothing wrong with that. Dorothy, whose son died at Normandy, offered the most unexpected view. Her son had written that most German prisoners were frightened kids who wanted to go home. If he saw their humanity during the war, I can see it now, she said. Crawford's investigation confirmed 3 pregnancies' clear violations, but with no coercion or security risks. The women entered relationships willingly. The men accepted responsibility. He recommended administrative action, not prosecution, recognizing human bonds formed in the war's aftermath. He sealed the report, addressed it to his supervisor in Dallas, and walked to the post office on a cold October morning. Dust blew down Main Street, swirling against storefronts and settling on parked trucks. Crawford stood on the sidewalk after mailing the report, looking at this small town that had become unexpectedly complicated. Somewhere in those ranches beyond the horizon, 3 women were waiting to learn their futures. 3 men were preparing for fatherhood. 3 children were growing in the space between enmity and love. Crawford's recommendation was accepted by his superiors with relief. Washington had no interest in prosecuting cowboys for falling in love with former enemies. The war was over. Public attention was focused on demobilization, economic reconversion, and the beginning of occupation duty in Germany. A scandal about pregnant prisoners in Texas would serve no political purpose. Administrative sanctions were imposed, formal reprimands, and small fines. The ranches were removed from the approved list for prisoner labor assignments, though by that point nearly all German prisoners had been repatriated anyway. The women's cases were handled individually. Elise Hartmann, Anna Becker, and Katharina Vogel were granted residency permits based on their pregnancies and the American citizens they were carrying. The normal restrictions on German nationals were waived in light of special circumstances. Elise Hartmann's daughter was born in February 1946 at the Hereford Hospital. Martha Mackenzie was present for the delivery, holding Elise's hand through the labor. Sam paced the waiting room until a nurse emerged to tell him he had a healthy baby girl. They named her Catherine After Martha's middle name, a gesture that made Martha cry, the Mackenzies raised Catherine together. The arrangement raised eyebrows in town, but the ranch was successful. The child was healthy, and eventually curiosity faded into acceptance. Anna Becker married Robert Harrison in 1946, 2 months before their son William was born. She adapted to ranch life while keeping traces of her German past. Robert's son returned from the Pacific later that year, initially tense but soon accepting Anna as his stepmother. Katharina Vogel's son arrived the same spring. Daniel and Michael Callahan both signed the birth certificate, never learning the true father. It stopped mattering. James grew up with 2 devoted dads who taught him ranch work and the value of chosen family. Crawford passed through Hereford in 1952 and saw all 3 families, thriving children growing, ranches busy, lives steady. He didn't stop, but felt satisfied. The rules had been broken, technically, yet the results spoke for themselves. People rebuilding after devastation. Crawford later received a letter thanking him for recognizing humanity over regulation. The descendants of those unions still live across Texas, proof that compassion can outlast war.